Yes, who's got the moves like Jagr? That's my headline, which I'm very proud of today. You probably have headlines.
I get that. Maroon 5 reference is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes, and I've got I've always have. You probably I don't know if you did you write headlines or are the headlines written for you?
For me, very once in a while I'll suggest a headline if something clever pops into my head, but normally the editors write the headlines.
Yeah. So I've got a list of them that on my desk, and the one that I really have been waiting to do forever is I want Hitchcock to go nuts in a press conference or just go crazy on the team and use Hitch's Be Crazy. That's been my favorite. I've been waiting. All right. Anyway, let's start the show. I've been waiting for that one forever. Friday, February 27th. Hey, Hockey World! It's Friday, February 27th. You know what that means? We're just 3 days. It's trade deadline eve, 2015.
And I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today, looking forward to that trade deadline.
And I'm Eric Dwachuk of the Globe and Mail, wondering if we haven't already passed the trade deadline.
Yep. And I am Eklund, hoping that we do have decent business on Monday if there's no one left. So here we are. We have had 2 crazy days. This is not uncommon in the last couple trade deadlines that we've seen this kind of thing happen. But I think this is probably, Eric, is this the most so far that we've seen, like where we're going into a trade deadline where we've seen some players come off the board?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to talk in absolutes because every trade deadline, they're always so interesting because of how the market evolves and how the dynamic evolves. And last year was unique in the sense that, right at the end there was still some quality pieces of the way that went for bargain basement prices, and that doesn't appear to be there doesn't appear to be any carryover this year at all because I think the general managers are getting tremendous value for the assets that they're putting into play. I mean, you can assess there's so many interesting trades that happened in the last 48 hours. As you say, but up in Canada, I mean, the fact that Dave Nonis has been able to do the things that he's been able to do, not just move the David Clarkson contract, which most people thought was untradeable, but even the fact that he made a deal for Daniel Winnick and got a 2nd and a 4th round pick for Daniel Winnick, and you shake your head because he's a very useful guy who has played an important bottom 6 role in Toronto, and at a time when you wonder about how hard everybody else is playing in the lineup. He's a guy that has continued to play hard all the way through. But a 2nd and a 4th round pick for Daniel Winnick, it's an astonishing haul compared to the fact that basically Marian Gaborik went for a 2nd and a 3rd last year as effectively compensation. You cannot put Winnick on the same plane as Gaborik. Thomas Vanek went for a 2nd round pick. Vanek is not the same commodity as Winnick. So it's as I say, it's been fascinating so far to see what has happened, and I think that the general managers that have Winnick-like assets or Toulouse-like assets, like Calgary, for example, shopping Curtis Glencross. I mean, I can tell you that that they were getting like fifths. That the offers a week and a half ago were not very good, and the expectation in Calgary now is they should be at least able to pry a 2nd rounder out of the team based on what other people are paying for players that probably aren't as good as Curtis Glencross.
I agree. Kevin, what are your thoughts so far on the overview of our last 48 hours?
Well, there's a couple things going on. I mean, each draft does have its own character, and what I see this season is, the special circumstances are dictating, what the prices that are being paid for these players, number one. And number two, we also had, and it's the first time there's always been discussion about this, but this is the first time where, the Carolina Hurricanes were actually concerned about that perhaps the players might get hurt before they could trade them, and they decided to go early, and primarily because that was a concern. Getting this return for Toulouse and Sekera was important to their changing on the fly. So they decided let's move early, which takes that out of the equation because they didn't really want to not play him, which is the other option. So I think that's new to me, at least where it's become part of the strategy. But the Winnick trade, and we always talk about this, but this was really the best example. The reason he went for so much was 2 things. One, his price, and I'm talking about his salary, was so inexpensive that it put teams that had cap trouble, it gave them the ability to get a real player a real player, because he's a useful player, as Eric pointed out. But they had to pay a premium for that because the Penguins couldn't get a $2 million player, so that limited their options. So he was the best player they could afford, and Toronto was willing to eat even what his limited salary was. They were able to eat some of that. Yeah. So because of that, they got they had to pay extra compensation to get that. So to me, what we're seeing is particularly with the Columbus-Toronto trade, just very creative managing, and I think this puts the Maple Leafs ahead of schedule on their renovation project. The quicker they can get it down to the chassis, the quicker they can start rebuilding the engine. And to be able to move out Clarkson, and how many times have you heard over the past 3 weeks that contract was non-movable? Yeah. Everybody said that. Well, and you can't get any cap relief from it by buying them out, so they're just stuck with them. Well, guess what? They're not now. Now, what the unsaid here is that you got to be the Maple Leafs to say, well, we'll just eat that money, we'll pay off Horton, keep paying him his contract, and we'll still go to the cap. Well, again, that's the advantage of being a rich team, is that you can do that. The Columbus Blue Jackets couldn't do it. That's why they had to trade Horton, because they got no cap relief, because it was real money they were paying out, and they're a budget team, not a cap team. So I think we're seeing a little more creativity, and I think the market, I think the way Eric set it up, with when you compare the winning price to what they got for Gaborik last year, it's really remarkable.
It's I thought, honestly, people are I thought the Jagr. Let's talk about trades now, some specifics. I want to start with Jagr for a second, because he's always interesting on so many levels. And he is a scorer. He still can play. This was a perfect move for the Florida Panthers in so many ways. And and one of those moves in retrospect that you kick yourself for not realizing that this is who they should have gone and gotten, because this is a team that needs to sell tickets, right? So Jagr, the amount of money they're going to pay him for the rest of the year, he'll pay for in jersey sales. I can tell you that right now. Like, people just buy Jagr jerseys like there's no going like it's going out of business. So he'll do that. Brings a lot of excitement down the stretch. Whether or not they make the playoffs, it doesn't matter. They brings a ton of excitement to the team. He's just a superstar. He's a celebrity, right? He's more than a hockey player. Plus, he gives them a leader and a mentor for a lot of their young players that they desperately need. They desperately need this. And I don't have any inside information on this, but Peter Luco, who left Philadelphia, was a big Jagr fan, and he just joined up with this organization in Florida. I can't help but think that he had was at least something to say about this, as far as if you're going as Jagr, if they come to him to ask him about Jagr, he would say nothing but glowing things, because Jagr turned Voracek and Giroux into a lot of what they are now. He really did, and both Giroux and Voracek were really unhappy when they didn't bring Jagr back. They both went in and petitioned, individually set up meetings to try to get them to bring Jagr back. So this is I want to start with that one. What are your thoughts on this, Kev? Start with you.
Well, I love the deal, and again, I think this is good creative managing. Dale Talon told me on the record he didn't want to give up his first or his second round pick. He gave up a second round pick, but the reason why this couldn't end up being a much better deal for them than people realize is they think they can get a second for Fleischman. So if they get a second for Fleischman, it ends up being Bergenheim and Fleischman, 2 rentals, going for Jagr, who's a rental. And just as you said, this is a tremendous move for them. Jagr is a very creative player still, and he still has moves, but he's not a perfect fit for some of the offenses, because they're speed teams, and he's not a speed guy anymore. But boy, he'll play really well. For the Panthers, he should be able to run the power play from the half boards. He could be a very effective player. So I love this trade, and you're still trying to send a message to the fans there. They're the lowest attendance team in the league. Just over 10,000. There's no free tickets anymore in Florida. You got to pay your way in. And this is just another thing to say, hey, look, we're serious about this. We're going to be here a while. We've only made the playoffs once. We're trying to win, or trying to get into the playoffs for the second time in 13 or 14 years. So it's time we do something. So I love the move.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, me too. I think the one thing that I can add to what Kevin said is that that you don't realize the impact Jagr has in a dressing room until you start talking to the players that are in the dressing room with him for a little while. Like, I remember when he went into New Jersey for the first time. You specifically ask questions about Jagr, and everybody prefaces it the same way. I knew him only by reputation. I wasn't sure about him because his reputation has changed over the years. But when you come to know him now and to listen to him speak now, he really is an elder statesman. I mean, he's smart, he's intelligent, he's committed, he's funny. The players, in a very short period of time, the ones that don't know Jaromir Jagr want to know more about Jaromir Jagr, just because he almost has like a Renaissance man kind of quality. I mean, he's a guy that works out in the middle of the night. He's a guy that has so many interests that are beyond hockey. And at the end of, like a couple of weeks in, everybody's saying, wow, this guy has depths that I didn't realize existed, and he's one of the greatest players of all time. So when you think about what hockey players respect in their peers, it is the kind of resume that Jagr has and the impact that he's had, the skill set that he has, the fact that at 43 he's still one of the strongest physical players in the game. He has that unbelievable ability to see open ice, and so everybody wants to play with him. And he's just, like, sometimes when you make a deal at the deadline, your biggest concern is, what is going to be the fit in our dressing room? How will the team? Because if you're making a move, you've got a good thing going chemistry-wise, right? If you're making a move, something is clicking, and it makes you think, let's add a piece to see if we can get just that little bit incrementally better to make the playoffs and maybe go on a run. So you have to debate that long and hard. Not every player is an instant fit. Some go in there, and the dressing room chemistry goes backwards because they cannot make a fit. And so the one thing about Jagr at this stage of his career is that you don't have to worry about that. It will take a very short period of time for all those guys in the room to say, wow, we've got Jaromir Jagr, let's go.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. I mean,
he is the NHL's version of the most interesting man in the world.
No question.
He's that guy. I know the story in Nashville. They had Peter Laviolette there, and I think they played the Devils not so long ago, and they asked Peter Laviolette before they went on air, is it okay if we ask about Jagr? They didn't know how he felt about him. They didn't want to put him on the spot. And Lavie said, ask me all you want about him. Basically he said he was one of his favorite players, and the passion leaked out and was contagious within the room. I mean, he loves playing the game, and early on in his career, I'm not sure people realized that about him, about what a real hockey guy he was, and he's still a very valuable player at such an advanced age, and he's had to keep himself in good shape in order to do that, and he really works at it. So.
He's also just but he's had those peaks and valleys too of like a great hero, in a story. Like he's gone up and down, and he's been in the KHL, and he's been practically thrown out of New York, and there's all sorts of things. There's been the gambling issues, and all. It is just, he's a story. He's a rock star. He's basically a rock star. He's as close as you can get to like a literal, when he was young, he did stupid things, tearing apart hotel rooms, and then, now he's like the guy who's sitting in the corner, with all the knowledge. And, if you ever want, is the one thing, and I agree with you completely, Eric, with the locker room thing, because the one time I've seen actual players, and current NHL players look like fans and little kids is when they're around Jagr. They actually, the fan in them comes back because they, one of them said to me one time, I used to be Jagr, when I played NHL, 02 or whatever, on my video games. I mean, they got, and Voracek grew up, literally owning everything Jaromir Jagr there was to own. So it completely, there's no question. I couldn't agree more. It's exciting, and it's going to bring a lot. It's a bold move, and I like the fact that Florida did it. I really do.
Well, and we haven't talked about this, but they could actually get in the playoffs.
Oh, I know.
They really could. And really, thanks primarily to the collapse of the Bruins. I mean, the Bruins have not played well, and they really opened the door for the Panthers, who have had their own struggles, but. Because the Bruins have not played well, the door is open. So, getting a boost like this, which I think will motivate the team, and, not moving out anybody other than, the veterans they're talking about moving out haven't been big contributors for them.
Right.
So, they could get into this.
They played Boston 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing you have to remember, that there's still 3 games left with the Bruins. Those are going to be incredible games.
I still don't, I would not say this makes them a favorite to get in. I still
no, I agree.
70-30 that the Bruins, end up with that spot. But this certainly gives them a better chance, and I just like it. And what we didn't talk about also is Dale Talon has been pursuing him for a long time. He's always been interested in him. So
yeah. Now let's talk briefly before we move on to what's to come. We'll go on to Clarkson. I do want to talk about the Clarkson trade for a little bit more in depth. I actually think people are underrating how good a trade this is for Columbus. And it is a good trade for both teams in a lot of ways, but for Columbus, I was getting indications over the last couple of days. Kevin, you'll know this from what I've been saying on the show, that Columbus was going to do something like this, that they were going to make a move. They were going to be a buyer and not a seller necessarily. This is a buyer move, and you can see Clarkson in the kind of game that the Blue Jackets play fitting in phenomenally well. And, putting him on, Clarkson on a line with like Boom Jenner and Scotty Hartnell, and you've got yourself a really hard line to play against. You've got yourself a really, in a situation that you don't need, you don't need Clarkson to be all he was or the next Wendell Clark, in Toronto. He can go there and really just do his thing. Clarkson thrived in New Jersey when, without a whole lot of pressure around. Yeah. And I also know that the folks in charge there in Columbus are big fans of Lou Lamoriello, and this is, I'm sure, they talked to him before they made this deal as well. This is not a quick move. I think this is a really good move. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, me too. I mean, and you're right. Most people are focusing on the financial aspect of the deal, and rightly so, because this was a financial deal. I mean, I would say the one thing about it is that Clarkson becomes their highest paid player. They're going to have to eventually pay Ryan Johansson and pay some of these other guys, and it may well be that a couple of years down the road, you're going to it'll be hard to have him as their highest paid player. Yeah. I look at Calgary. Dennis Wideman is the highest paid player in Calgary. Right. I mean, so in terms of the value that he returns, it's not the same as their best player, which was Mark Giordano. But having said that, I mean, they had backed themselves into a corner. They had not insured the Horton contract. They were on the hook for the money, and now they've essentially traded a player that probably isn't going to play again and has no value to them other than as an organizational symbol that they were prepared to go out and make this free agent move. And they get a body back that should be a contributor. And I agree. The history of the National Hockey League will tell you that sometimes the fit is everything. So, I think Clarkson went into Toronto. It was hailed in the first couple of days as being like a great coup because they were able to outbid, 3 other teams that were in the running for him. That's what drove the price up. He was a hometown guy. He was what that team needed, right? That, like a smart guy, a guy that was comfortable in front of the media, a guy that could, who could, make some things happen for, open up space for the skill players. And then what went wrong? I mean, he got that 10-game suspension for leaving the bench in the preseason. And so that was the beginning of the end for his career in Toronto. And people sometimes forget about that. What he was trying to do in a preseason game was do what he always does. He wanted to show that he was prepared to stand up for his teammates. He felt that because he was earning this salary, that the onus was on him to do it. So he did something that was probably not very smart. He got dinged for that 10-game suspension. He got off, while the rest of the National Hockey League was playing, he was watching. He got into Game 11 and just felt like he had to keep doing more. And I think that, lots and lots of players in the National Hockey League have tried to, on the first day they're in the lineup, pay the team back that's giving them all this money. And I just think that's counterproductive. You have to be able to just play the game. You have to play your own game. You have to play within the system. I think because he was trying to do too much from the get-go, he got off on the wrong foot, and he could never get back. And it became a slippery slope, and the harder he tried, the worse it got. And finally, it got to the point where, it wasn't working at all. So that was never going to turn out. In Columbus, he gets to start over from scratch. They don't have the history there. I think people are willing to give him an opportunity, and that's what he needs. He needs a fresh chance. He needs a chance to just close the door on what happened in Toronto and reset and try to be the player he was in New Jersey. And if he's the player he was in New Jersey, he's not that old, so there's no reason to think that he, a couple of years removed from a 30-goal season, he can't go back and be that player. And then suddenly, a year from now, it might look pretty good, even if he's not a 50-point guy, if he plays a hard game and gives them 40 points, and he's a top 9 forward for them, that's better than what Nathan Horton offered, which was a guy that was that's going to be like Mark Savard or Chris Pronger, there but not there.
Right, and but what's interesting is his contract, his actual money that they have to pay him does go down. So for a non-cap team, that's a win-win.
Sure.
Too.
What? Hey, that's a great point. Dollars out means more than we think. Everybody always focuses on cap hit, but it's like Mike Richards' contract. I mean, before Toronto did this, they talked seriously with Los Angeles about flipping those 2 contracts. Richards, I know for a fact that was a conversation they had, and LA didn't want to do it because they felt that that the Clarkson contract was even worse than the Richards contract. But the reality is that the last 2 years of Mike Richards' contract, he's down to $3.5 million. So if you're a team that wants a cap hit, and it may well be that it's 2 years from now, because I think that Richards is going to be in the Kings organization indefinitely. I don't think they're planning to buy him out. A couple of years from now, if he's playing in the minors, somebody might want that contract. That might be a financial reason for taking on Mike Richards when he's a $3.5 million out the door player. His cap hit will always be 5 and change. But the last couple of years of the contract are going to be way more affordable than right now, and those are contracts that are either you can either buy them out or you can move them to teams that don't mind taking the cap hit.
Yeah, completely agree. And we've seen this before, like as well as you put it really well too, in terms of this kind of player trying to do too much when they sign a big contract. The one that comes to mind for me always is Jay McKee. When he was in Buffalo, he was amazing, leading the league in block shots, signed a huge contract with the St. Louis Blues, went there and tried to do too much, and the same kind of situation happened because the guys like that, what they do is not something that's easily recognizable, and they want to be recognizable when they sign a contract like that. They feel like they have to do something that's out there, and when Clarkson made that move, it felt just like that. It really did. That was really impressive. So let's move on, Kevin. What are your thoughts here? Going now. We have a lot of players left. We have the has the price been set? I'll ask you again. I asked you the same question yesterday.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we have the marketplace is established, and I think all the teams that still have players left, they're rubbing their hands together now because they feel like as Eric said, the prices have been good. And there's still teams that need help, and they need to get bodies. I mean, Tampa Bay still needs a defenseman. Chicago has not plucked off a forward and maybe a defenseman left. I mean, they went from having no money to spend to having a lot of money to spend because they're a big enough market. And I think the point that Eric made before was so important because, that's true. I mean, some teams, just because they have cap space doesn't mean they have budgetary room. But Chicago's the kind of team that, for sure, will use this extra money. And actually what it really means is they're going to end up spending more than the cap. Yeah. But because they're a major market team, they can do that. But, we still got moves that have to be made. And I think we're still going to see some aggressiveness. I think it's all going to come down to this weekend. Like, there may not be as many players as we normally have on trade deadline day. Because
it feels like it.
Yeah, no, it does to me, and I think people want to move. I know yesterday Stan Bowman of the Blackhawks said he was close, and he wouldn't say that if he didn't think he had a deal in principle. I think we'll see something from them today as well, and I think there are still some intriguing names. Obviously, Vermette needs to be traded, and I'm sure that will probably come down maybe today or maybe even over the weekend.
Yeah, I can put you on mute if you need to take that.
Yeah, I can do that. Let me just see.
Yep, no problem. And same with you, Eric, if you're into a situation where you have to take calls, because we are at that point in the time where a call can come in that's important.
I'm trying to figure out a way of looking at my BlackBerry while we're doing this. Well, I think the Arizona Coyotes are the team that everybody is watching right now, including the Calgary Flames. The Flames have a situation where, as of this moment, there's no firm word as to the seriousness of Mark Giordano's injury. So Calgary is a team that was trying to do something similar to the strategy that Kevin was outlining with the Panthers as they relate to Jagr. Calgary is trying to get as much value as they can for Curtis Glencross because they have a lot of depth up front, and frankly, what they're trying to do is create long-term openings for some of the kids in their minor league system that they feel are ready to play in the National Hockey League. So they haven't really been negotiating with Glenn Cross. He took a hometown discount the last time to sign with Calgary, and they are very anxious to move him. And again, in a similar situation to Daniel Winnick, they are prepared to take the maximum amount of contract back. So any team that's up against the salary cap that has issues, Calgary's got lots of room. The contract isn't bad, and they're willing to take half of it back. So essentially, he won't cost you any cash, but they hope to get a premium in return. And then I think that even before the Giordano injury, and as I say, we don't know how serious it is, they were really looking for a defenseman. You know, they got depth in goal. They've even got depth defensemen in a lot of ways. But they had 4 guys that were the principally responsible for where they are in the standings. And that's Giordano playing with T.J. Brody and also Weidman playing with Chris Russell. These guys played major minutes for Calgary. And they basically they don't trust the third defense pair in Calgary. They don't use them a whole lot, and they could ill afford to lose any of these guys. And so the whole idea going into the trade deadline, the strategy was if they can take whatever assets they get for Glenn Cross and then turn them into a defenseman that can help them in the short term, they would like to do that. And that's obviously what the Panthers are trying to do with Jagr. If the deal ends up being Jagr for Fleischmann and Bergenheim, that's a net gain. And the same thing in Calgary. If Calgary can flip Glenn Cross and then get Zbynek McCalloch back from Arizona, then that they're strengthened in a position where they really need help. And so. And the other question is, like, where is Keith Yandle going to go, or is Keith Yandle going to go anywhere? He's a guy that's on a contract, and he's a guy that can help you this year and going forward. And there's lots of teams, and I put Calgary at the top of this list, that keep saying the same thing, that, as much as we've enjoyed the run that we've been on, we want to make the playoffs this year is important. We cannot lose sight of the big picture. So, they're not that interested in rentals. If they bring a guy in, even on a short-term contract, it will be because they feel that this guy they can sign him and that they can, he can be a part of the team going forward. So that's the kind of player that they're looking at. And I think there are a lot of teams, we often talk about, focus on the teams that are looking for that one piece of the Stanley Cup puzzle. You have to flip the equation. And there's a whole bunch of other teams that are either out of it, that are thinking to themselves, okay, what piece can we put into place that 3 or 5 years from now, when we're a contender, will be a significant piece? Can we find one of those guys? Can we make that deal so that that our future is more secure than it is today? So that to me is the other part of it that we have to be looking at between now and Monday.
I agree, and I mean, Vermette has obviously been a big ticket everyone's talked about, and it feels as if Boston. I'm hearing Boston and Chicago both are in on Vermette. So it's interesting how this whole thing plays out, because Chicago's the pressure's been put on by the loss of Patrick Kane. Boston, there's a little bit of pressure put on by the acquisition of Jagr. There has to be something in Boston's mind saying, okay, well, the team's chasing us. Jagr just went down to Florida, and Boston was trying to make moves for that. And and Glenn Cross, I've heard with both teams as well. So you're getting some big players, which is kind of making this trade deadline a little bit more interesting right now. Some big teams with high expectations. I mean, the Bruins, even though they're not in the playoffs, they're one of those teams that if they make the playoffs, they'll be tough to beat in the Eastern Conference. Everyone knows that. So that's the tricky part. Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah. Speaking of big players, I heard all day yesterday not to rule out the possibility that Dion Phaneuf could be moved, and I've had multiple general managers say, if the Leafs are willing to take some money back and get him down to $5.5 million, that they can move him and get a fair return. At the $7 million cap, it's a much more difficult trade for most teams. But there's enough teams still looking for defensemen, and everyone's intrigued by the idea that Phaneuf playing a 3-4 role can be pretty valuable.
Right.
And there's been a lot of talk with a lot of teams about that, and I don't have any inside information on this, but the speculation that I have, if you're looking at a team that could, if it got down to 5.5, would be the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, they have cap room, they have prospects down in the minors. They've said that they won't give up a first or a second round pick, and I believe them. I think Ken Holland has reached the realization by, the changing on the fly that he's been doing, is that you need your draft picks in order to survive in a cap world. I don't think he'll do that, but they've got some interesting guys. Sproul, who's been down in Grand Rapids, who seems to be close to being ready. A lot of pro scouts like him down there. They got Polkinen, who's up with the team now, who has 30 goals in the American League. Jacob Kindle's a former first-round pick. Doesn't have a lot of value, but there's some pieces. But he's played a lot of NHL games, so they're capable of maybe pulling off that trade if they wanted to do that. And there are other teams beyond the Red Wings. I mean, I just throw them out there because they have the cap room and they could really use the defense. But I think of all the players that are floating out there, like a Yandel, a Phil Kessel, the guys that have the big contracts, the one that I think has the most possibility of moving, and I don't think it's better than even odds, but I think it would be Dion Phaneuf because of the physical presence he have and the fact that everybody is just likes the idea of, boy, if he could be our 3-4 guy, we'd be all right. So,
did you return to Calgary, Eric?
Well, I was thinking about that. They do have a need for a defenseman like him, and and Brian Burke runs the hockey operations, and he's the guy that brought Dion to Toronto. So I would, believe me, I would not completely rule it out. I don't know if bringing in that kind of a contract for the next 7 years is something that they're looking at. I mean, they've got Giordano coming up at the end of this year, and they need to sign him to a contract. And I'm, I would say the only concern I have is how that might affect the chemistry in the room and the whole notion that can you go back to your future? So, but Brian Burke likes him, and I think that but Kevin is 100% right. The big thing about Dion Phaneuf is he's being paid like a 1-2. He's being utilized like a 1-2, and he has been an effective NHL player when he can play as a 3-4. And when he was in Calgary, when he was playing down the depth chart with Roman Hamrlik here, that was probably the best hockey he played in the National Hockey League. So any coach that can protect Dion a little, just a little, you don't have to protect him a ton, but you have to protect him a little, and understand that he's what his limitations are. He's still, his hockey IQ varies at different times, and he'll make a misread and it'll look bad on the highlights, and in a market like Toronto the focus is so great. But the scenario I prefer the scenario that Kevin is outlining, because I've heard that too. And I guess I would go one step further and say essentially it would be the same trade exactly, or well, similar to when Detroit brought in Larry Murphy. I mean, Larry Murphy was run out of Toronto on a rail. He was the worst player in the history of the game. He couldn't skate. He couldn't turn. He couldn't play because of the focus and everything. So Detroit picked him up for virtually for nothing, and he went in there and he was an important piece during those glory years. I mean, and I think that something like that can happen. It's amazing because Detroit is a hockey town. Detroit is a major market, but it's different than Toronto. And a guy that couldn't play in Toronto, like Larry Murphy, suddenly was a great fit in Detroit. And if the Red Wings were prepared to gamble, I think that would be a similar scenario. He would just be a better fit on that team than he is on his current team.
Wow, that would. I mean, it would. Leaf fans would be crazy if they moved Clarkson and Phaneuf in at this deadline. That would be a win-win all around for them for sure. Are there any players left that were there when Dion Phaneuf was there? I was trying to think about that, Eric. Anybody there that's still there?
Not the ones that mattered. I mean, there was talk about rift with different players. Jim was gone for years gone. Craig Conroy is assistant general manager. So, but I mean, I don't think that. You can't let personal issues or problems that people had in the past reflect what you're doing today. Most of that team has been turned over. I think Giordano is still here, but I don't think that would be an issue. I mean, Giordano is one of the great captains in the game. He would make anybody feel welcome coming into the dressing room.
Yeah, that would be good.
I think one of the keys with Phaneuf too is. In Toronto, he was required to be one of the leaders, and I don't think that's really his comfort level. If he went to a team like Detroit, for example, where the leadership hierarchy is well established, he could come in and be a leader by his playing ability. I mean, he plays aggressive style, but they wouldn't need him to carry the flag at all. And I think that's actually better for Dion Phaneuf. I don't think he enjoys that aspect of the game, and I think he would be better off. And I've been trying to figure out just because of what Yzerman's done in Tampa Bay. Can we rule that out? Like if they went down to $5 million, that cap hit would be difficult for them. But boy, Yzerman has worked a lot of magic. And can you imagine that Tampa Bay roster if you added Phaneuf to that group with Strawman and Hedman and holy cow, and his physical presence would be great for both Detroit or Tampa as well. But Tampa doesn't have the Red Wings have enough room to do anybody they need to do, and Tampa Bay is not in that position.
The name I keep coming back to because there are so many teams looking for defense, and among Detroit, obviously we have. Tampa's looking for defense. Anaheim's looking for defense. Anaheim's another one that's really interesting to me because they are not playing well right now, and sort of been very quietly, even though they're so far ahead of everybody else. I mean, the Predators have struggled a little as well, but Anaheim struggled and looked bad struggling. Mike Green is still there. And Mike Green's gone back and forth. He's available. He's not available. He's not available. But he. He's one of those names that I think if you look at other surprise things like the trade we saw yesterday, I think Green could be a possibility. What's going on in Anaheim, Eric?
Well, they want to make a hockey deal, and that's part of the problem is that so if you look at the move that they made, Smith-Pelly for Sekatch, I mean that's an old-fashioned hockey deal. It's something that that us old-timers really like because you can look at that trade and instantly know what's going on. Montreal has this. Murph mentality up front, and so they need a guy that's beefy like Smith-Pelly, a guy that could just go up and down the wings and just create a physical presence that they don't have. And in Anaheim, they thought that the moves that they made off season and during the season would enhance their scoring, and the reality is it still gets Getzlaf, Perry, and then the drop off is pretty significant. And Perry, who had a tremendous start to the season, has really had a tough time of it lately. He's had the injury, he had the measles, and he just doesn't seem in sync right now. So the combination of him not coming back all that well or at the level that he was at before the injuries and the illness has created a need for more skill up front, and they just need more scoring. So, but I think that they realize that they will have Vatanen back for the playoffs. They will have Anderson back for the playoffs. They are comfortably ahead in the Pacific Division. So these last games are not as important to them as those 6 teams that are kind of on the playoff cusp in the Western Conference. Obviously Jeff Petrie has been linked to them. They were in on Tyler Myers. They just weren't prepared to give what Buffalo ended up wanting to do, and so they're trying to do a deal. But if they do it, they in the case of a guy like Petrie, it would be with the idea that bring him in now and sign him to a contract extension because they don't want a rental right now. If they can at all do a hockey deal without giving up too much, I think they'll give up a third that becomes a second if they get to the conference final, but they don't want to give up a first, and so. They like a lot of budget teams, have to be cognizant of what it would cost in terms of dollars out, and then also in terms of assets that the organization is prepared to give up, because they're a draft and develop team. Even though they play in the greater Los Angeles market, they do not have the same budget flexibility that say the Kings do or the Sharks have been given, and so. So it's a little bit trickier for Bob Murray there to try and navigate these waters because he can't just go out and spend money unilaterally. He has to keep his eye on the short and the long term.
Right, it makes sense.
Well, it is trickier, but I think they're feeling they have to make a deal. They have to alter their defense. This is still a team with a chance to win the cup, and if they don't do anything, I think they're at risk. I mean. Is Boudreau safe? No, I don't think so. And even Bob Murray. I mean, if they don't make a run, so I think they're going to do something. I don't know what they're going to do, but I do agree they're trying to make a hockey trade. And Petrie has played well, which has helped his value. I talked to a couple of pro scouts who have both said that when they saw him, he's been a much better player later in the season than he was earlier. So. But I think they gotta get something done. Petrie, by the way, is a Michigan native. I don't know whether he knows Cam Fowler, but he probably does.
He probably would.
I think that's pretty. But you know what? Let's talk about Mike Green for a bit because I think he's an interesting guy. Obviously, because he played for Bruce Boudreau, has a great relationship with Boudreau. I mean, it was when Boudreau was promoted to Washington that Green came up and blossomed into a guy that for a lot of years was one of the top scorer among defensemen in the National Hockey League, and they have a good relationship. Mike Green can't play for every coach because not every coach is prepared to put up with the deficiencies in his game, but he absolutely can play for Bruce Boudreau. And then you think about a team like Calgary. Green is from here, and Calgary's going to have money to spend in the off season. And so if you're right, Washington is flip-flopping. I don't think they're going to move him at the trade deadline. I suppose anything can change, but when he hits the open market, I think he's going to be a very attractive commodity to a lot of teams, and I think that's the risk that Washington takes. That if they don't move him and they can't sign him to a contract extension, are you prepared to let a player of Mike Green's stature, even the diminished Mike Green that we see now, that maybe not be the same player that he was 3 to 5 years ago? He is a guy that would in the market would attract a lot of interest.
I agree, and another team that I hear is quietly trying to do something, and in a hockey move type situation as well, is St. Louis. And I heard that Patrick Berglund is the guy that's available, correct? And that's what it's been available off and on throughout the year, is what I've heard. But now, they really want to do something. Hitchcock's always tweaking, and he's always a big fan of tweaking things. And that's the situation. What kind of value does Berglund have? That's a question. Kevin, any thoughts?
Well, I think teams probably feel that what you see is what you get. That he has not developed quite the way everybody thought he would be. That he's not going to be a frontline offensive player. But he still has size and value, and I certainly think they could get back a player who may fit their system a little better than he does. They don't really need what he offers. They have a lot of bigger guys, and they play that style, so they probably see him as a guy that maybe it's a position thing for him. They can move, bring in other players who just fit the system better. But to be honest with you, I'm more inclined to think they won't do anything. I talked to Doug Armstrong earlier, and he said, they're poking around, they're looking, but again, they're a budget team, not a cap team, and I think they're pretty content with how the team has come together this season. I think if something presents itself, they'll look at it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the whole key to St. Louis is Kevin Shattenkirk coming back from injury, right? I mean,
exactly.
St. Louis right now is not the team that's going to open the playoffs, because Shattenkirk was so incredibly important for what they were accomplishing this year. I mean, anybody that watches St. Louis will know how intelligently Ken Hitchcock deployed his people when he had them healthy. Like Shattenkirk and Steen were the point guys on the first power play. Pietrangelo and Bouwmeester on the second, but those guys are the shutdown pair. Like Hitch can, because he doesn't have to use them necessarily on the first power play unit, he can play them big minutes in defensive situations. And whereas Shattenkirk has this great offensive ability, isn't the best defensive defenseman in the league, but the reality is it was working extremely well with the group that they had there. And so he'll be back. He'll be back for the start of the playoffs. And when the Blues have their press conference to announce that they did very little or nothing at all, they'll say, well, our big addition is going to come when we get our number one defenseman back, the guy who was leading the NHL in defenseman scoring, and everybody gets to play a little bit further down the depth chart because you can slot Shattenkirk in there at 3, and they're probably going to be good enough. They're certainly not going to upgrade the goaltending. Obviously, they made a clear commitment to the two guys that they've got when they allowed Martin Brodeur to retire, and I think that they like the what Lehtera's brought. They like the way Tarasenko has blossomed. They like the way Schwartz has played this year, and if they believe, I think, that if Backes and Oshie are healthier than they were a year ago. I mean, they were just so hamstrung by injuries going into the playoffs last year, and even at that, they gave Chicago a run for it. So if Oshie and Backes are healthy, they weren't. If Tarasenko is humming on all cylinders, he was just coming back from that hand injury. There's lots to like about St. Louis as they stand right now, and I think that sometimes you look at your team and you say, okay, I think we're good enough.
It's funny about the last thing, and before, so what I want you two to think about while I talk about the Flyers for 1 second, because I think they're an interesting team as well. I want you to think about, we're going to do a little wagering at the end of this. We're going to guess the number of trades that happen on trade deadline day. Very tricky this year because we have other things coming along.
Wait a second. That's an unfair question because we don't know how many deals are What 24-hour period? You have to give us a better parameter. Are you talking about from 9 a.m. until 3
midnight
p.m.
till 3 p.m. From midnight till 3 p.m. on Monday. What's happening? All right, so that's you got to come up with a number.
All right.
Because every year they talk about this. Every year it's like it's usually been around 25 or something in the last several years. It's been around there. So to talk about the Flyers for a second, you know how we talk about it always comes down to, it's amazing. It feels like it comes down to one game. The Flyers have a game Saturday night against the Rangers. Okay, and this is the last game they play before the lockout. They have their carnival, with all the players and fans on Sunday, and then they have the trade deadline on Monday. Kimmo Timonen's playing on Saturday night. He's looked incredible in practice. He wants to go elsewhere and play for a contender. And you have a situation where Michael Del Zotto's been amazing. Nick Grossman's been really good. You've got 3 defensemen on this team, and this team's been hanging around. They beat the Predators and Capitals, and then came back and lost to the Hurricanes and Leafs. So and now they're playing the Rangers on Saturday night. The Bruins keep losing, so they're still in this thing. The Bruins play the Devils tonight. So I think it really is one of those situations where if you want to watch a game on Saturday night, watch the Flyers-Rangers game. It's actually on NBC in the States. It's officially the actual NBC network. It's going to determine where the Flyers go. I really feel it's that strongly that this is where they're going to head, because they're getting offers for those 3 players. And although Timonen's a tough one because people aren't going to see him play for one game, but he does have a whole career worth of if he looks healthy, he's Kimmo Timonen. So if you're going to watch a game, I think you definitely want to watch that. So now let's get your picks here. So I'm going to start with you, Kevin. I'm going to flip the coin. I flipped the coin. Give me an amount of trades.
I actually have a little bit of inside information because Bovada Odds in Las Vegas told me yesterday that the over and under is 15.5 for Monday. Okay, so I have that knowledge. I also have done this for a lot of years. Know that there's always a lot of little trades that get counted that really are, it's like a smallmouth bass going for a 6-inch perch. That kind of trade. So I'm going to go over on that, and I'm going to take because so many guys have gone. I'm going to take 18. That's my number.
18 would be the lowest in years. That would definitely be the lowest in years. 15.5 is really low. That's a sucker bet right now, isn't it? All right.
Well,
Eric,
I don't know
because
here's how I weigh it too. Like I think that we're taping this on a Friday. I think there's going to be a fair bit of action Friday, Saturday into Sunday. And what'll end up happening is it'll be like any sale, where as it gets closer to the deadline, the prices are going to start coming down. That's what we saw last year. I think we'll see that again. So some of these teams are going to be trying to play, 2 or 3 suitors off against each other, and it may well be that if they've still got a guy that they want to trade, they have to reduce the price. So I'm going to say I think somewhere between 15 and 18, because Kevin took 18, I'll take 20. But that'll be, those minor league, exchanges of minor leaguers that, there'll be 5 or 6 of those. So I'll say 20, but I don't say that with any conviction because I need to see how the next 72 hours shape up.
Yeah, there's no conviction. This is only for fun. All right, so finally, I'm going to say this. This is kind of bold. It's either going to be above 25 or below 15. So that's where my head goes.
Well, that's a strange prediction.
It's either going to be a crazy run on a lot of these little type ticky-tack deals like you're talking about. I'm going to go above 25. I'm going to go 28. All right, that's really ridiculous. And here's my player. Every year I rank the players I think will be traded. And here's my Mendoza line player. If this player gets traded, it's a busy trade deadline, and that is Erat. I'm going to go with Erat's the guy. Will he be moved or not? He's a UFA. There makes no sense in Phoenix keeping him. But will he go? If he goes, we're in the 20s. If he doesn't go, we're below it. That's my thought.
All right. I like that.
That's the spot. We'll be back next week.
Martin Erat sweepstakes. The 2015 trade deadline comes down to the Martin Erat sweepstakes. That is a sad commentary on the state of affairs.
Yes, that is a sad commentary.
That's what I'm saying. If we've reached the Erat spot, we have reached ridiculousness. But there were teams that were interested in him before. He is serviceable. He's one of those guys that's right in the middle of, okay, yeah, he could help us, but
Well, he's
right
a
there.
warm body that, you're right. No, he could easily be traded, and maybe he might be one of those guys. A couple of years ago, Calgary traded Blake Como for 5th-round pick.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch of guys, like Martin Erat could go for a 5th-round pick. Teams would be willing to give up a 5th-round pick for Martin Erat. And there's probably 10 guys in the National Hockey League that fit that category.
Like with the Predators bringing back, for example. Like the Preds could bring him back. He's like the kind of guy.
The first team that came to mind. If it doesn't cost you anything.
Yep. No, and he played well for them when he was there until late in his time there. So.
And they've been bringing back ex-Predators, so it's possible. It's very possible. All right, this is fun. We'll be back next week, probably like Wednesday or Thursday. I'm sure we'll all want to soak our heads on Tuesday, and we're not going to do a show on Monday because it's the deadline. So, yeah, remember, guys, the Hockey Buzzcast is today at 1 o'clock, and on trade deadline day, the Hockey Buzzcast will run from 11 a.m. until 4 p.m. all day long. So we'll be doing all sorts of things on that day. We'll have various guests on throughout a lot of different Hockey Buzz writers will be on, and various folks as well. So we'll talk to you soon. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you then.